look, we spend a lot of time here on the program talking about wages and interest rates and the Reserve Bank and the government and all that type of thing. We told you earlier that wages in Australia continue to grow faster than inflation. Now, that's great for wage earners right now, of course. Not so good for companies that do employ them. So a big question for government, and maybe the Reserve Bank, is whether a prolonged period of real wages growth would ultimately cost some workers their jobs. And to get our heads around this and just where Australia's economic cycle sits right now compared with other parts of the world, let's bring in Rabobank Global Strategist Michael Every. Michael, many thanks for your time. I just want to go this because you always see a government will try and throw the Reserve Bank under the bus when it comes to the blame if people's jobs are lost. Somebody obviously has got to ultimately pay if wages growth goes too strong for too long.
It does if it is out of line with productivity. If we can get productivity up, then you can have wages growth and everyone wins.
But hang on, productivity's zero in Australia.
I was going to say, in Australia, productivity is completely zero. So that's the real issue. And whose responsibility is that? Is that the RBA's or is that the government's?
So whose is it?
Well, it's got to be on the government more than the RBA, surely. I mean, the RBA certainly have a role in it, and they can jawbone about it as much as they like. And the interest rate does have an impact at the margin, but surely it's got to be to do with education. It's got to be to do with a whole string of other policies that the government puts in place rather than the RBA. OK,
so then is it right for politicians, and I hear today, and we played it earlier on, the Treasurer crowing about the fact that real wages are going stronger and that they're as strong as they've been for a long time. Is that something to be actually proud of, or does that ultimately cost someone their job?
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to cost them their job. Ceteris paribus, it depends on lots of other things moving around at the same time. But it certainly isn't in line with the same government wanting the RBA to cut interest rates aggressively. So you have to pick your battles and work out what you're going to get. OK, but then this government has given the RBA a dual mandate to bring inflation down and to keep as many people in jobs as they possibly can. Are there times when those two things rub up against each other that you can't actually, you're not able to achieve both things at the same time? Well, if you have zero productivity, which we do, then yeah, of course, it's like I've got a dual mandate of eating as much chocolate cake as I can and remaining as slim and handsome or beautiful as I can possibly be. They tend to run in the opposite direction.
OK, so then we saw yesterday, and we played extended versions of this, Andrew Houser, the Deputy Governor, who's come from the Bank of England, who effectively has said, hey, listen, this is the reality of the way in which the world sits in Australia. You can't basically continue to have everything that you wish for. And also, by the way, it seems as though economics is more of a sport in Australia than cricket seems to be because it makes the front page more. I then see a response today from the former Communications and Senior Labor Minister Stephen Conroy on this network here, where he's called Andrew Houser a wanker, which he then translated to British, saying that's a tosser. And then let's just pick up a little of what he had to say. Have a listen.
They went too far last year in putting their rates up, and they're too slow to bring them down because they're going to put this economy into recession, just like Houser did in the UK. Interest rates too high, economy in recession. The interest rates are a blunt instrument that are not addressing the causes of inflation. They are punishing those who can least afford to be punished.
So there's another senior Labor figure jawboning the RBA, effectively trying to teach them economics. So does Andrew Houser need to be taught economics, do you think?
To be honest with you, and I apply this to Australia and I apply it to the UK, where the Bank of England are based, both the government and the central bank need to relearn economics. I don't think either of them have got it right for a multitude of different reasons. If you had interest rates right now, and by the way, real interest rates here are still quite low.
Yes.
If you had interest rates back at 0 or 0.1 where they were, where do you think inflation would be right now?
Well, it'd be right through the roof. Of course it would be.
Exactly. Equally, if you had interest rates at 6%, things would be worse off. Neither of them are doing anything about addressing productivity. So the government is wrong to just try and pass the buck to the RBA. The RBA is wrong to just say, well, nothing we can do, productivity, etc. They need to be looking at it too, to an extent. But I think you actually need a more integrated approach where, heaven forfend, you actually need the government and the RBA working together to understand what's the big picture we're trying to achieve.
But isn't that dangerous, given the fact that Donald Trump on the weekend, on Friday night or Thursday night, basically came out and said, well, I think maybe the president should have a role in setting interest rates. JD Vance, his vice president, came out and said, yeah, sure, it's a political decision. But that goes against the grain of everything we hear that the Reserve Bank should be independent.
Well, we only got central bank independence a couple of decades ago. Prior to that, it was presidents who basically lent on the Fed or set interest rates such as they were, directly or indirectly. And the concept of an independent central bank is still pretty new in history. And you have to ask yourself, when you look at these central banks, right the way around the world, don't just mean Australia, have any of them covered themselves in glory over the past couple of decades? Look at the Bank of Japan just the other day raising interest rates by 15 basis points when people didn't expect it and saying we've got a lot more in the tank, blowing up the entire global financial market. Now, don't tell me that they're doing a good job doing that, because clearly they're not. Now, a government doing a good job? No, neither of them are, and they both need to rethink things urgently, in my book.
So, OK, the central banks need to look at themselves and look at their performance. And let's be honest, there is a bit of a me too and follow the leader around the world in terms of the Federal Reserve. But it seems that we go back to where we started. Jobs are the key right now if you are to have some sort of robustness in your economy longer term.
Jobs are the key. Think of them as being the fuel in the tank. Fair enough. You've got to keep that tank filled up with fuel to keep it going. But where do you want to go to? What kind of jobs? Being paid what, in what sectors? And this is the real issue. Central banks and governments keep focusing on GDP, and I'm sure everyone here, when it comes out, you talk about the GDP number. All those GDP numbers look at demand. No one looks at supply. What are you or aren't you making? What sectors are you in? Is it a good sector or a bad sector? These are the kind of questions you need to look at if you want to get productivity up.
Tell you what, Michael Every, good to have you in the program. We'll do it again very shortly. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.